can leave now. I know the owner. I'm the victim here.
Ma'am, I need your ID. We have reports of an assault.
Assault? They refused me service. I am not giving you anything.
Saturday night. 9:47 in the evening. A quiet suburban street in Scottsdale, Arizona, lit by the amber glow of streetlights and the flickering neon of a high-end wine bar tucked into a strip mall. The kind of neighborhood where people drive luxury vehicles, wear designer clothes, and operate under the unspoken assumption that the rules of the world bend around them. Tonight, that assumption is about to be tested. Officer Daniel Reeves had been on the force for 6 years. Not a rookie. Not a veteran. Somewhere in between, which meant he had seen enough nonsense to stop being surprised, but not so much that he had stopped caring. He pulls his patrol car into the strip mall parking lot after receiving a call, possible assault in progress at Vine and Ember, the wine bar at the far end. No weapons reported. Just a loud altercation that had spilled out onto the sidewalk. What he finds when he steps out of the vehicle is not a brawl. It is a woman standing in the middle of the crosswalk, arms crossed, chin lifted, staring down a younger female employee who is visibly shaking. The woman is well dressed. Manicured nails. A handbag that costs more than most people's rent. And an expression of absolute, unshakable contempt. Her name is Margaret Holloway. 46 years old. Resident of the Scottsdale Airpark community for 12 years. Owner of a small real estate brokerage. Wife of a man who sits on the board of a local country club. And in approximately the next 40 minutes, she is going to find out that none of that means a single thing. If you have ever watched someone who genuinely believed they were untouchable get brought back to earth by a pair of handcuffs, this is the video for you. Subscribe right now if justice and accountability are the things that keep you coming back. Hit that button, turn on notifications, because this one is going to leave you speechless. To understand what led Officer Reeves to that crosswalk, the story has to start about 90 minutes earlier, inside Vine and Ember itself. The wine bar is the kind of establishment that caters to the Scottsdale crowd. Soft lighting. Exposed brick. A menu where a single glass of Cabernet Sauvignon costs more than most hourly workers earn in an hour. The clientele tends to be affluent, social, and, on weekend evenings, thoroughly lubricated. Margaret Holloway had arrived around 8:15 with 2 friends. They ordered a bottle of something expensive. Then another. By 9 o'clock, the bartender, a 22-year-old woman named Kayla, had already flagged her to the shift manager. Margaret was loud. Not obnoxious loud, not yet. Just loud in the way that people become loud when they have decided that the room exists to serve them and nothing else. The shift manager, a steady young man named Brett, made the call to stop pouring alcohol for the table. This is standard procedure. Every licensed establishment in Arizona has the legal obligation to cut off patrons who display visible signs of intoxication. Brett approached the table politely. He explained that he could offer water, appetizers, maybe a coffee. Margaret looked at him the way one might look at a mosquito that had landed on a white linen tablecloth. That is when the evening turned. Margaret did not accept the cutoff quietly. She did not nod, finish her water, and leave with dignity. Instead, she leaned forward in her chair, fixed Brett with a stare that could have peeled paint, and said something that Brett would later repeat to Officer Reeves almost word for word. She told him that she had been coming to this establishment for 2 years. That she knew the owner personally. That her husband had helped fund the renovation of the space 18 months prior. And that if Brett did not pour her another glass of wine immediately, she was going to make a phone call that would end his career before the night was over. Brett, to his credit, did not flinch. He repeated the offer of water. He remained calm, professional, and immovable. This is precisely the kind of moment that separates service industry workers who survive the job from those who burn out and quit within a year. Brett had dealt with difficult customers before. He had a system. Stay neutral. Do not engage with the emotion. Repeat the policy. Offer alternatives. Margaret was not interested in alternatives. She pushed back from the table, grabbed her handbag, and stood up. For a brief moment, it looked like she might simply leave. Her 2 friends exchanged nervous glances. The other patrons in the immediate area had gone quiet, the way a room goes quiet when it senses that something is about to happen. Margaret did not leave. She walked directly toward the bar. What happened next unfolded in under 60 seconds, but it would become the centerpiece of the entire investigation. Margaret rounded the bar, not from the customer side, but from the service entrance at the back. Kayla, who was in the middle of pouring drinks for another table, looked up just in time to see her coming. Margaret grabbed Kayla by the forearm. Not a tap. Not a gesture. A grip. The kind of grip that leaves marks. She pulled the younger woman toward her and began shouting in her face. The words were mostly about the wine, about respect, about the fact that she was a valued customer and deserved to be treated accordingly. But the words were almost secondary to the physical force behind them. Kayla tried to pull away. Margaret tightened her grip and shoved her sideways into the edge of the bar. A glass shattered. Another patron stood up. Brett came running from the back and physically inserted himself between the two women, pushing Margaret away. She swung at him. The swing connected with the side of his face. Not a slap. A closed fist. The entire sequence was captured on the bar's interior surveillance camera. The footage would later be reviewed by Officer Reeves, by a detective assigned to the case, and eventually by a prosecutor. It was, by any legal standard, textbook battery. Twice over. But Margaret did not see it that way. Not even close. By the time Officer Reeves arrived on scene, Margaret had already moved outside. She was standing on the sidewalk in front of the wine bar, and she was not hiding. She was not apologizing. She was not trying to disappear into the crowd. She was standing in the open, arms crossed, posture rigid, broadcasting a level of confidence that would have been impressive if it were not so profoundly misplaced. Brett had followed her out. He was on his phone, already on the line with dispatch, giving a calm and clear account of what had just happened. Kayla was behind him, holding her forearm, her sleeve pushed up to reveal the angry red marks where Margaret's fingers had dug in. She was crying quietly, not from pain alone, but from the particular kind of shock that comes when someone attacks you for no reason you can understand. Officer Reeves approached Margaret first. Standard procedure. Identify the person who appears to be in charge of the situation. Margaret was clearly that person. She straightened up as he got closer, and the first thing out of her mouth was not a question. It was a statement. She told him her name. She told him she was a business owner in the area. She told him she had done nothing wrong. And then she told him, with the kind of casual authority that suggested she expected compliance, that he could leave. Officer Reeves did not leave. The first 5 minutes of the interaction set the tone for everything that followed. Officer Reeves began the way every competent officer begins, with identification. He asked Margaret for her driver's license. She handed it over without argument, but with a visible eye roll that communicated her opinion of the entire exercise without her having to say a word. He ran her information. Clean record. No priors. No outstanding warrants. The kind of background check that comes back in seconds and tells an officer nothing except that this person has never been in serious trouble before. Which, paradoxically, can make the current situation more volatile, not less. People with no prior contact with law enforcement often have no idea how to behave when they are on the wrong side of an investigation. They have no frame of reference. No instinct for what compliance looks like. Margaret had no such instinct. While Reeves was still processing her information, she began talking. Not answering questions. Talking. A steady, almost rehearsed stream of justification. She had been a loyal customer. She had been disrespected. The staff had been rude to her all night. She had simply defended herself. Officer Reeves listened. He did not interrupt. He did not agree. He did not disagree. He simply listened, which is one of the most underrated skills in law enforcement. Let them talk. Let them fill the silence. The more a suspect talks without being prompted, the more they reveal. Margaret was revealing a great deal. The psychological profile that emerges in the first phase of an encounter like this is one that bodycam analysts have seen dozens of times. It is not malice. It is not stupidity. It is something far more interesting and far more dangerous, a complete and unexamined belief in one's own social superiority. Margaret Holloway had spent 12 years building a life that confirmed, at every turn, that she was important. She lived in an expensive neighborhood. She drove a luxury car. She moved through social circles where people deferred to her, or at least appeared to. Her husband had connections. She had connections. The world, as she experienced it, was a place where problems were solved by knowing the right people and applying the right pressure. This is what psychologists sometimes call instrumental entitlement. It is not the belief that one is entitled to special treatment out of malice toward others. It is the belief, reinforced by years of successful experience, that special treatment is simply how the world works for people like you. Margaret had never been told no by someone whose no actually mattered. Not in a way that stuck. Until tonight. The officer standing in front of her was the first person in a very long time whose no carried the full weight of the state behind it. And Margaret, for all her confidence, had absolutely no idea what to do with that. Officer Reeves moved to take statements from the victims while a second officer, Sergeant Tina Morales, arrived on scene to assist. Morales took over the direct supervision of Margaret, positioning herself nearby but not engaging in conversation. This was deliberate. When two officers are on scene, one handles the suspect, one handles the evidence. Splitting attention is how cases fall apart. Brett gave his statement clearly. He described the sequence of events from the moment he approached Margaret's table to the moment she swung at him. He was specific about the timeline. He was specific about the physical contact. He did not embellish. He did not editorialize. He simply told the officer what happened, in order, and answered every follow-up question without hesitation. Kayla's statement was harder to get. She was still shaken. Her hands were trembling. But she told the same story. The grip on her arm. The shove into the bar. The shouting. The glass breaking. She showed Officer Reeves the marks on her forearm. They were vivid. They were unmistakable. And they told a story that no amount of social standing could erase. Two independent witnesses. Two consistent accounts. Physical evidence visible to the naked eye. And surveillance footage that Brett confirmed existed and could be preserved. From a probable cause standpoint, the case was not complicated. It was, in fact, one of the cleaner battery cases Officer Reeves had worked in years. The complexity was not in the evidence. It was in the suspect. While the statements were being taken, Margaret had not remained quiet. She had begun a campaign, and it was one that Officer Reeves had seen before, though rarely executed with quite this level of conviction. She started name-dropping. She mentioned the owner of the wine bar by first name, as though this established some kind of shared authority. She mentioned her husband's position at the country club. She mentioned a city councilwoman she claimed to know personally. Each name was dropped with the same casual confidence, the same implication that these connections should matter, that they should change the calculus of the situation. Sergeant Morales noted each one. Not because they were relevant to the investigation, but because the pattern itself was relevant. It was influence peddling, pure and simple. The suspect was not trying to defend herself on the merits of what happened. She was trying to create a web of social pressure that might make the officers hesitate, might make them think twice about whether this arrest was worth the political blowback. It was not going to work. In the state of Arizona, battery is battery regardless of who you know. The law does not have a VIP lane. There is no social connection powerful enough to override probable cause and physical evidence. But Margaret did not know that. Or if she did, she had never believed it applied to her. The names kept coming. The officers kept listening. And the case kept building. There is a moment in almost every encounter like this where the suspect realizes, for the first time, that the situation is not going the way they expected. For some people, that moment comes early. They read the room. They see the officer's tone, the body language, the quiet efficiency with which evidence is being gathered. They adjust. They become cooperative. They understand that the fastest way out of the situation is through it, not around it. For Margaret Holloway, that moment had not yet arrived. Officer Reeves returned from taking statements and informed Margaret that based on the accounts he had received and the physical evidence present, he had probable cause to place her under arrest for 2 counts of battery. He explained that she would be transported to the Scottsdale Police Department for processing. He explained that she would have the opportunity to contact an attorney. He explained all of this calmly, clearly, and without any tone of aggression or condescension. Margaret stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a disbelieving laugh. A laugh of genuine, unguarded contempt. As though the idea that she, Margaret Holloway, could be arrested, was the funniest thing she had heard all evening. Then she stopped laughing. And she started arguing. The argument phase is where the psychology becomes genuinely fascinating to observe. Margaret did not deny that she had been at the bar. She did not deny that there had been a confrontation. What she denied was the characterization of events. In her version, she had been the victim. The staff had been deliberately rude to her. They had tried to humiliate her in front of other customers. She had simply stood up for herself. This is a cognitive reframing that happens in real time, and it is remarkable to watch unfold. Margaret was not lying in the way that someone who knows the truth and is consciously inverting it lies. She was genuinely constructing an alternative narrative, one in which her actions were justified, her anger was reasonable, and the people she had physically assaulted were the actual aggressors. Officer Reeves did not take the bait. He did not argue with her version of events. He did not point out the contradictions. He did not say, "We have surveillance footage that shows exactly what happened." Not yet. That information would come later, in a context where it could not be dismissed or debated. For now, he simply repeated the facts as they stood. She was being placed under arrest. The evidence supported the charges. She had the right to remain silent. She had the right to an attorney. Margaret was not interested in her rights. She was interested in being heard. The handcuffs came out at the 11-minute mark. Officer Reeves gave one final instruction, "Hands behind her back, please." Margaret looked at the cuffs as though they were a personal insult. As though the metal itself was an affront to everything she believed about who she was and how the world was supposed to work. She did not comply immediately. She did not refuse, exactly. She simply stood there, arms still crossed, as though the instruction had not been given. Sergeant Morales stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, and repeated the request. "Hands behind her back. Slowly. Please." Margaret complied. But as the cuffs closed around her wrists, something shifted. The contempt on her face did not disappear entirely, but it cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for the officers to see what was underneath it. Fear. Not the fear of someone who is in physical danger. The fear of someone who has just realized, in a single visceral moment, that the social scaffolding she has spent years constructing is not going to hold. That the names and the connections and the reputation she has built are utterly, completely irrelevant to the two pieces of metal now locked around her wrists. It was the kind of moment that bodycam footage captures in a way that no other medium can. You can see it in the eyes. The micro-expression. The brief, unguarded flash of a person confronting the limits of their own power. What followed was a masterclass in the psychology of denial under pressure. As Sergeant Morales guided Margaret toward the patrol vehicle, the suspect began cycling through emotional states at a speed that was almost dizzying to observe. First came anger. Margaret demanded to know on what basis she was being arrested. She repeated her version of events. She insisted that the bartender had started it, that Brett had physically intervened in a way that constituted assault on his part, that the whole situation was a setup designed to embarrass her. Then came bargaining. She asked if she could make a phone call. She wanted to reach her husband. She wanted to reach her attorney. She wanted to reach someone, anyone, who might intervene and make this stop. The requests came faster and faster, each one delivered with increasing desperation, as though the right phone call could still undo what had already happened. Then came something close to denial. She began insisting that this was all a misunderstanding. That once everyone calmed down and talked it through, it would become clear that no crime had been committed. That reasonable people could look at the situation and see that she had done nothing wrong. Officer Reeves, walking alongside her, said very little. He did not feed any of the emotional loops. He did not validate the anger or engage with the bargaining. He simply kept moving, kept the situation calm, and kept his eyes on the objective, safe transport to the station. The ride to the station was where the most psychologically revealing moments occurred. With the body cam mounted on Officer Reeves and the in-car camera capturing the back seat, the footage shows Margaret going through a transformation that is almost painful to watch. The anger faded first. It burned itself out, the way anger does when there is no one left to direct it at. The bargaining faded next, replaced by a hollow silence that lasted nearly 2 full minutes. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tears started. Margaret Holloway, the woman who had laughed at the idea of being arrested 12 minutes earlier, was crying in the back of a police car. Not sobbing. Not performing. Crying in the way that people cry when they are alone and have run out of ways to pretend everything is fine. She said something to Officer Reeves through the partition. He asked her to repeat it. She said she did not understand why this was happening. She said she had not done anything wrong. She said she just wanted to go home. It was, in its way, the most human moment of the entire encounter. For a brief window, the entitlement and the bravado and the social armor had all fallen away, and what was left was simply a middle-aged woman who had made a catastrophic decision while intoxicated and was now facing the consequences of it. The moment did not last. But it was there. At the station, the booking process began. Margaret was processed with the same efficiency and the same lack of drama that characterizes the vast majority of bookings. Fingerprints. Photograph. Personal belongings inventoried and sealed. The entire procedure took less than 20 minutes. During the process, Margaret made 2 requests. The first was for her attorney, whose name and number she provided without hesitation. This was, notably, the first genuinely smart thing she had done all evening. An attorney. Not a friend. Not a business contact. Not someone from the country club. An attorney. The second request was more revealing. She asked the booking officer whether this would be in the news. Whether people would know. Whether her name would be public. The booking officer told her that arrest records in Arizona are a matter of public record. That she could not control what media outlets chose to cover. That the best thing she could do at this point was cooperate with the process and consult with her lawyer about next steps. Margaret nodded. The last trace of the woman who had stood in that crosswalk with her arms crossed and her chin lifted was gone. What remained was someone doing the math. Calculating the damage. Thinking about the 12 years of reputation she had spent building and the 60 seconds it had taken to destroy it. The legal analysis of the case is straightforward, but it is worth examining in detail, because it illustrates precisely why social status fails so completely in the criminal justice system. Under Arizona revised statutes, battery is defined as the intentional and wrongful inflicting of physical harm or injury on another person. The statute does not require serious injury. It does not require hospitalization. It requires only that physical contact was made, that it was intentional, and that it caused harm or was offensive in nature. Margaret satisfied every element of that statute, twice. The grip on Kayla's arm was intentional physical contact that left visible marks. The punch to Brett's face was intentional physical contact that caused immediate pain and swelling. Both acts were witnessed by multiple people and captured on surveillance footage. There is no defense available under Arizona law for the actions Margaret took that night. Self-defense does not apply, because she was the aggressor. Provocation is not a recognized defense to battery in Arizona. And the argument that she was simply responding to poor customer service is, from a legal standpoint, entirely irrelevant. The only variable that could have changed the outcome was Margaret's behavior after the fact. Had she remained calm? Had she cooperated? Had she expressed remorse and offered to make amends? The charges might still have been filed, but the prosecutor might have had reason to consider leniency. Instead, Margaret's behavior at the scene, the name-dropping, the refusal to cooperate, the contempt for the officers, made leniency significantly less likely. The broader lesson embedded in this case extends well beyond Margaret Holloway and her particular brand of entitlement. It touches on something fundamental about how wealth and social position distort a person's understanding of accountability. Research in social psychology has consistently shown that individuals of higher socioeconomic status are more likely to believe that rules and consequences do not apply to them. This is not a character flaw in the traditional sense. It is the predictable result of moving through the world in an environment where problems are routinely solved through money, connections, and influence. When you can pay your way out of a parking ticket, negotiate your way out of a business dispute, and leverage your social network to avoid professional consequences, the idea that some problems simply cannot be solved that way becomes genuinely foreign. Margaret had likely never encountered a situation where her social capital was worthless. Until the moment she grabbed Kayla's arm in that wine bar, every significant conflict in her adult life had probably been resolvable through the mechanisms she understood. Money. Relationships. Reputation. Pressure. The criminal justice system is, by design, one of the few spaces in American life where those mechanisms do not function. An officer cannot be impressed by your car. A prosecutor cannot be charmed by your social connections. A judge cannot be swayed by the fact that you know someone important. The system is not perfect, and it is not immune to the influence of wealth in all circumstances. But in the immediate moment of an arrest, when the evidence is clear and the probable cause is solid, social status is genuinely, completely irrelevant. The surveillance footage from Vine and Ember was reviewed by Detective Sarah Kwan the following Monday morning. It corroborated every element of the witness statements. The footage showed Margaret approaching the bar from the service entrance. It showed her grabbing Kayla. It showed the shove. It showed Brett intervening. It showed Margaret's fist connecting with Brett's face. There was no ambiguity in the footage. There was no angle that could be interpreted differently. There was no moment in which Margaret could credibly claim she was acting in self-defense or responding to physical aggression on the part of the staff. Detective Kwan noted in her report that the suspect had shown no signs of remorse during the encounter with officers, had attempted to use social connections to avoid arrest, and had provided a version of events that was directly contradicted by both witness testimony and video evidence. The report was forwarded to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for charging decisions. 2 counts of battery. 1 count of disorderly conduct for the behavior during the arrest itself. The charges were filed within 48 hours. Margaret retained a criminal defense attorney within 24 hours of her release on bail. The attorney, in a statement to local media, described the charges as excessive and suggested that his client would be cooperating fully with the legal process. The statement said nothing about the surveillance footage. It said nothing about the marks on Kayla's arm. It said nothing about Brett's swollen face. It said nothing about accountability. The aftermath of an arrest like this rarely plays out in a single night. For Margaret Holloway, the consequences extended far beyond the jail cell and the booking photograph. Within 48 hours, the arrest became public record. A local news outlet picked up the story, not because Margaret was famous, but because the body cam footage was striking. The contrast between the composed, entitled woman on the sidewalk and the tearful, bewildered woman in the back of the patrol car made for the kind of story that spreads quickly online. Not because people enjoy watching someone suffer, but because there is something deeply satisfying about watching someone discover, in real time, that the world does not operate the way they assumed it did. Brett and Kayla were contacted by the prosecutor's office. Both confirmed their willingness to testify. Kayla, in particular, expressed something that went beyond the immediate situation. She talked about the broader pattern of customers who treated service industry workers as though they were beneath them. About the assumption, shared by far too many affluent patrons, that the people who serve their food and pour their drinks are somehow less deserving of basic physical safety. Margaret's attorney filed a motion to suppress the surveillance footage on the grounds that it was obtained without proper authorization from the bar's management. The motion was denied. The footage had been voluntarily provided by Brett, who was the shift manager on duty and had the authority to preserve evidence relevant to a crime committed on the premises. The case was moving forward. The evidence was solid. And Margaret Holloway was going to have to answer for what she did in 60 seconds on a Saturday night. Margaret Holloway sat in a courtroom 3 weeks after her arrest and entered a not guilty plea. Her attorney stood beside her, composed and professional, and the proceedings moved forward with the quiet efficiency of the justice system doing what it was designed to do. Process. Evidence. Accountability. The case had not yet gone to trial at the time this story was compiled. But the trajectory was clear. 2 witnesses willing to testify. Surveillance footage that left no room for alternative interpretation. Physical evidence documented by the responding officers. And a suspect whose behavior at the scene, captured on body cam, painted a portrait of someone who had believed, right up until the moment she was proven wrong, that consequences were something that happened to other people. Margaret Holloway is not a villain. She is not a monster. She is something far more common and far more instructive. She is a person who was never forced to reckon with the gap between who she believed she was and how she actually behaved. Until that Saturday night, the gap had never been visible to her. It had been covered over by wealth, by social position, by a network of relationships that insulated her from the ordinary friction of life. The handcuffs stripped all of that away in a single moment. What was left underneath was not the confident business owner who had laughed at the idea of being arrested. It was a frightened woman in the back of a patrol car, asking why this was happening to her, genuinely unable to connect her own actions to the outcome she was now facing. That is the real story here. Not the arrest itself. Not the charges. But the moment a person discovers that the version of the world they have built around themselves is not real. That the rules apply to everyone. That status is not a shield. That the only thing standing between any of us and accountability is the assumption that we are somehow exempt from it. Margaret Holloway found out she was not exempt. And the body cam footage captured every second of it. So here is the question that should stay with you after this story ends. At what point in the evening do you think Margaret Holloway actually realized that her social connections were not going to save her? Was it when the handcuffs came out? Was it when she saw the marks on the bartender's arm and understood that the evidence was real? Or was it later, alone in the back of that patrol car, when the tears finally came and there was no one left to perform for? Let me know your thoughts in the comment. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.